Leah Carter is 22, and she is already late on her first day at Stardust Tech in Midtown Manhattan. She sprints through the lobby with a stack of onboarding forms, a half-eaten sandwich, and an iced Americano that is sweating onto her hand. She tells herself she is an adult, a professional, and definitely not a walking disaster. The elevator dings open like a judge calling her to trial. A tall man steps out, perfectly pressed suit, perfectly still expression, perfectly doomed to meet her. Everyone in the lobby freezes, like the building just switched to silent mode. Leah recognizes him from the company website, and every terrified whisper in the office. Eli Thorne, founder and chief executive officer, the cold king of New York tech, the man rumored to alphabetize his heir. Leah tries to stop, but her sneakers slide on a spot of melted slush. Her elbow bumps the file stack, the files bump the cup, and the cup launches like it has a grudge. The iced coffee arcs through the air in slow motion, black and merciless. It lands squarely on Eli Thorne's limited edition suit, the kind with hand-stitched buttons that probably have their own insurance. Coffee runs down the fabric, down his vest, and down the front of his life, like a tiny waterfall of doom. Leah stops breathing, because breathing feels too loud. Someone in the lobby whispers, "Oh no." Jesse Park, the executive assistant with the permanent look of someone who has seen too much, makes frantic eye contact with Leah. Jesse's eyes say, "Run." Eli's eyes say, "Try." Leah finally exhales and blurts, "I am so sorry, I will pay for it, I will sell my soul, I will sell my kidneys, I will sell my sandwich." She lifts the sandwich like an offering, and then realizes it is now very much not an offering. Eli looks down at the spreading stain, then up at Leah, and his face does not move. His voice is calm, which is somehow worse. Eli says, "Do you know what this suit costs?" Leah shakes her head so fast her ponytail nearly whips her own cheek. She says, "More than my entire existence." A corner of Eli's mouth twitches, not a smile, more like a glitch in a very expensive robot. Eli says, "Your internship stipend cannot buy the left button." Leah feels her soul leave her body and hover near the ceiling lights. She says, "Then I will work it off, I will do anything, just do not fire me before lunch." Eli pauses, as if he is running calculations. Jesse silently mouths, "He never pauses." Eli says, "Fine." Leah almost cries with relief, until he continues. Eli says, "Your wages are withheld for 3 months, and you become my personal assistant until the debt is paid." Leah blinks, because the words do not form a reality her brain can accept. She says, "Personal assistant, like calendar and emails?" Eli looks at her like she just asked if gravity is optional. Eli says, "Like everything." Leah hears an invisible choir sing, "Welcome to Hell," and it sounds a lot like the air conditioning. She tries to protest, but Jesse coughs loudly and makes a slicing motion across his throat. Leah swallows and forces a smile that feels like it was assembled without instructions. She says, "Yes, sir." Eli turns and walks back into the elevator without waiting for her. Leah scrambles after him, hugging the files and praying her shoes do not betray her twice in one morning. Inside the elevator, the silence is so sharp it could cut glass. Leah stands as far from Eli as the corners allow, like the coffee might explode again. Eli pulls a clean microfiber cloth from his pocket, because of course he does, and begins blotting his suit with controlled fury. Leah says, "I have napkins." Eli says, "Do not." Leah closes her mouth and stares at the floor numbers like they are escape routes. When they reach the top floor, Eli steps out first, and people part for him like he is both CEO and weather event. Leah follows, clutching her badge like a shield. Jesse appears beside her, moving like a man who teleports through stress. Jesse whispers, "Congratulations, you just got promoted to the most dangerous job in this building." Leah whispers back, "Is there dental?" Jesse says, "There is therapy, but it is just me sending you memes." Eli's office looks like a museum that hates fingerprints. The desk is empty except for a laptop, a single pen aligned with the edge, and a coaster placed exactly in the center of nothing. Leah takes one step in, then another, and she can feel the room judging her breathing pattern. Eli sits, removes his jacket with careful disgust, and hangs it on a chair, as if the chair has to apologize. He says, "Rules." Leah straightens like a soldier who has never held a weapon. Eli says, "You do not touch my desk." Eli says, "You do not move my items." Eli says, "You do not bring liquids within 6 feet of me." Leah nods, then realizes she is still holding the coffee cup, now empty, now evidence. She lowers it like it is a grenade. Eli says, "You will schedule my day in 15-minute blocks." Eli says, you will keep my inbox at 0. Eli says, you will make my coffee. Leah stops nodding, because her brain is busy screaming. She says, I can make coffee. Eli looks at her as if she just said she can defuse a bomb with a spoon. Eli says, you will make my iced Americano, at 85 degrees. Leah frowns, because math is not her enemy, physics is. She says, iced in 85 degrees feels like a paradox. Eli says, it is not a paradox, it is a requirement. Leah says, okay, so warm ice. Eli says, 85 degrees. Leah writes it down, and draws a tiny skull next to it. Eli says, half a sugar cube, not a full cube, not a quarter. Leah says, half a cube, got it. Eli says, foam thickness 2 millimeters. Leah says, how do you measure foam? Eli says, with a ruler. Leah stares, because she is trying to decide if he is joking. He is not joking. Eli says, you start now. Leah leaves the office, and the second the door clicks shut she presses her forehead against the wall. Jessie appears like a helpful ghost and offers her a sticky notepad. Jessie says, write down everything. His brain is a spreadsheet with emotions disabled. Leah whispers, does he ever smile? Jessie whispers, only when the quarterly report is perfect, and even then it is basically a rumor. Leah takes a deep breath, then heads toward the break room like she is marching to battle. The coffee machine is sleek, expensive, and definitely not built for 85-degree iced anything. Leah reads the manual twice, then searches videos on her phone, then whispers an apology to the machine. She pours, steams, chills, stirs, and somehow ends up with a cup that smells like defeat. She finds a ruler in the supply closet and measures the foam like she is doing surgery. When she delivers the cup, she holds it with both hands, arms locked, eyes wide, like a waiter in a horror movie. Eli looks up and says, put it on the coaster. Leah says, yes, sir. She steps forward, and the cup trembles, because her hands have their own anxiety now. She places it down, exactly centered, and then freezes, waiting for judgment. Eli takes a sip. 2 seconds pass, then 3, then 4, and Leah feels every molecule of air. Eli sets the cup down. He says, close. Leah says, close is good, right? Eli says, close means you redo it. Leah smiles with the pain of someone who just swallowed a cactus. She says, understood. By lunchtime, Leah has made 7 coffees, and each one has been close. Eli has not raised his voice once, which is somehow more exhausting. At 2, Leah accidentally schedules a meeting with the wrong investor, and the investor arrives early, wearing a grin and confidence like cologne. Leah hears him say, tell Eli I do not do delays. Leah rushes into Eli's office and says, I made a mistake, I am fixing it, please do not fire me, I can also fake my death if necessary. Eli does not look up from his screen. He says, fix it. Leah says, yes, sir. She runs back out, heart hammering, and Jessie watches her with a pitying smile. Jessie says, first week is survival mode, second week is character development. Leah says, do I get a third week? Jessie says, if the coffee does not kill you. Across the open floor, Miranda Blake from marketing strolls by in heels that sound like judgment. Miranda smiles at Leah with her mouth, but not her eyes. Miranda says, so you are the coffee girl. Leah says, I am also the paperwork girl, and the panic girl, I contain multitudes. Miranda tilts her head. She says, Eli does not keep people who embarrass him. Leah says, then I guess I should stop embarrassing him by working hard. Miranda's smile tightens, and she walks away like she is saving her energy for sabotage. That night, Stardust Tech is still lit on the top floor long after the other offices in the building go dark. Leah is at her desk outside Eli's office, surrounded by color-coded folders like she is building a rainbow prison. Eli steps out, sleeves rolled, tie loosened, and that tiny hint of humanity makes Leah blink. He says, you are still here. Leah says, my bus pass says yes. Eli says, you can leave. Leah says, my debt says no. Eli pauses. He says, fine, then stop falling asleep sitting up. Leah sits taller, offended and grateful at the same time. She says, I am not asleep, I am resting my eyes. Eli says, your eyes are snoring. Leah laughs, startled, because it is the first time he has said something that feels almost like a joke. Eli looks away quickly, like humor is a secret he did not mean to reveal. He goes back into his office, and a moment later the door opens again. Eli tosses a cardigan onto Leah's desk without looking at her. He says, you are cold. Leah touches the soft fabric, surprised by the quiet care hiding in his bluntness. She says, thank you. Eli says, do not mistake basic temperature management for kindness. Leah pulls on the cardigan anyway and whispers to herself, too late. On day 5, Miranda corners Leah near the printer with a stack of documents. Miranda says, Eli needs these for the board meeting, make sure the numbers match the deck. Leah says, sure. Miranda's lips curve. She says, and do not mess it up, the board hates incompetence. Leah takes the stack and heads toward the conference room, stomach tight. Halfway there, Jessie jogs up and grabs the papers. Jessie flips through them, then goes pale. Jessie whispers, these are wrong, the revenue line is swapped with the burn rate. Leah whispers, is that bad? Jessie whispers, it is catastrophic, it makes us look like we are on fire. Leah's heart drops. She says, Miranda gave me these. Jessie says, of course she did. Before Leah can move, Eli walks up behind them, silent as a software update. He takes the papers, scans one page, and his eyes go cold enough to chill the building. Eli says, these are not my numbers. Leah says, I did not change them, I swear. Miranda appears like she was waiting nearby for the explosion. She says, maybe your assistant cannot handle responsibility. Eli looks at Miranda. His voice is flat. He says, marketing sent the wrong packet. Miranda laughs, light and fake. She says, that is a serious accusation. Eli says, it is an accurate statement. The air in the hallway goes tight. Eli turns to Jessie. He says, pull the email chain, show the board the correct packet, and move marketing to review. Then he looks at Leah, and the edge of his gaze softens by a fraction. Eli says, you are with me. Leah follows him into the boardroom like she is walking into a storm. The board members stare, unimpressed and expensive. Leah stands at the side, hands clasped, trying not to visibly tremble. Eli presents with calm confidence, correcting every number, answering every question, and never once letting the board glance toward Leah with blame. When the meeting ends, one board member says, good recovery. Eli says, there was nothing to recover, there was an error upstream. Leah's chest loosens, and she realizes she has been holding her breath for 40 minutes. Outside, Leah whispers, you saved me. Eli says, I protected the company. Leah says, and my job. Eli says, you are useful. Leah says, that is the nicest insult I have ever received. Eli walks away, but Jessie catches Leah's grin and mouths, he cares. Later that week, Leah discovers that Eli's office life is a maze of rules, but also a map of quiet habits. He hates crumbs, but he always leaves a small bowl of water by the window. He corrects her calendar, but he never corrects her when she hums while working. He pretends not to notice the tiny stickers Leah adds to the folder tabs, but she sees him peel one off and tuck it into his drawer. One evening, the building management schedules a power test, and at 7 sharp the lights flicker, then die. The open office fills with groans and phone flashlights. Leah stands and says, okay, everyone, breathe, the Wi-Fi will return, we will survive. Jessie says, speak for yourself, my group chat is my oxygen. Leah turns toward Eli's office, because she has to, because that is her job now. She opens the door and finds the room dark, with the city lights outside like distant stars. Eli is on the couch, sitting rigid, shoulders tight, his face pale in the glow of his laptop screen that has gone dead. Leah says softly, Eli? Eli's voice comes out too controlled. He says, it will be back in a minute. Leah steps closer and sees his hand gripping the edge of the couch. She says, are you okay? Eli says, yes. His voice says no. Leah pulls out her phone and clicks on the flashlight, casting a warm cone of light across the room. Eli flinches, then stills, like he is embarrassed by the reaction. Leah keeps her tone light. She says, if the dark is bothering you, I can tell it to leave. Eli says, do not joke. Leah sits on the armchair near the couch, close enough to share light, not close enough to scare him. She says, I am not joking, I am negotiating, I am very persuasive. Eli stares at the phone light, then at her. He says, I do not like the dark. Leah's eyebrows lift. She says, the scary CEO is afraid of something, this is groundbreaking. Eli's jaw tightens. He says, it is irrational. Leah says, so is pineapple on pizza, but people still do it. A sound that might be a laugh escapes Eli's throat, brief and startled. He looks annoyed at himself for it. Leah says, there you survived, step 1 complete. She reaches into her pocket and pulls out a strawberry candy, because she has a sweet tooth and a habit of carrying tiny comforts. She holds it out. She says, emergency sugar. Eli looks at it like it is a suspicious object. Leah says, it is not poison, I cannot afford poison. Eli takes it, unwraps it with careful fingers, and puts it in his mouth like he is completing a dare. His shoulders loosen a little. Leah says, better? Eli says, acceptable. Leah says, that is basically joy, in your language. Eli says, do not translate for me. Leah says, okay, I will just interpret your vibes. In the dim light, she notices a small scratch on Eli's knuckle, and she frowns. She says, you work too much. Eli says, work keeps things orderly. Leah says, and the dark makes things messy? Eli does not answer, and the silence is honest. The lights do not come back for 20 minutes. During those 20 minutes, Leah talks about her ridiculous roommate, her student loans, and her dream of owning a couch that does not smell like someone else. Eli listens, and when he speaks, his voice is quieter, less blade, more human. He says, I started this company in a basement with one laptop and a fan that sounded like a dying bird. Leah says, that is very inspirational, and also very gross. Eli says, it was necessary. Leah says, you do a lot of necessary things. Do you ever do fun things? Eli says, fun is inefficient. Leah says, so is fear of the dark, and yet here we are. Eli looks at her, and his eyes soften again, a fraction more this time. Finally the lights snap back on, and Eli straightens, the wall between them rising back into place. He clears his throat. He says, do not tell anyone. Leah raises her hand like she is taking an oath. She says, my lips are sealed, by student debt and fear. Eli says, good. The next morning, Leah arrives early and finds Eli's desk already perfect. She also finds a small carton of strawberry milk on her desk, cold, with a sticky note that says, for sugar emergencies. Leah smiles so hard it hurts her cheeks. Jessie slides into the chair beside her like a gossip missile. Jessie says, why are you glowing? Leah hides the milk behind her monitor. She says, I am not glowing, I am fluorescent. Jessie squints. He says, Eli Thorne does not do sticky notes for just anyone. Leah says, it is probably a productivity strategy. Jessie says, sure, and I am the tooth fairy. On Friday, Leah notices Eli leaving the building through the side door instead of the lobby. Curiosity wins over common sense, so she follows at a distance, like a very obvious spy. Outside, the air is sharp with winter, and the sidewalks are crowded with shoppers and office workers. Eli walks to the corner by the trash cans, crouches, and whistles softly. A scruffy tabby cat appears from behind a planter, tail up, like it owns the street. Eli pulls a small bag of treats from his coat pocket, because of course he does, and offers them with gentle patience. Leah's heart melts so fast she worries she might drip. She steps closer and says, so this is your secret life. Eli freezes. He says, you were not supposed to see this. Leah says, I knew you were a softie, I just did not have evidence. Eli says, it is not softness, it is responsibility. Leah says, you sound like a superhero trying not to admit he cares. The cat rubs against Eli's hand, purring, and Eli's face turns almost gentle. Leah crouches beside him and offers her finger to the cat, careful and slow. The cat sniffs, then headbutts her like a blessing. Leah laughs. She says, okay, I am officially bribed into silence forever. Eli says, good. Leah says, what is the cat's name? Eli hesitates. He says, I do not name it. Leah says, that is liar behavior. Eli says, it is called Orbit. Leah grins. She says, Orbit, because it revolves around you, right? Eli says, it revolves around food. Leah says, same. Behind them, a camera shutter clicks, and Leah turns to see Miranda standing across the street, phone raised, smile sharp. Miranda says loudly, how touching, the intern and the CEO feeding alley cats. Leah stands, brushing off her knees. She says, it is a sidewalk cat, and you are being weird. Miranda steps closer. She says, be careful, Leah, people might think you are using him. Leah says, people might think you are obsessed. Miranda's eyes flash. She says, I have worked for this company for years, I have earned my place near him. Leah says, you have earned the right to stop stalking him. Eli stands, tall and calm, and his presence quiets the street around them. He says, Miranda, go back inside. Miranda's smile returns, sweet as poison. She says, I am only worried about the company image. Eli says, then focus on your work. Miranda turns away, heels clicking like a threat, and Leah watches her go with a grim set to her mouth. Eli looks at Leah. He says, you should not engage. Leah says, I engaged, I survived, I am evolving. Eli says, she will not stop. Leah says, neither will I. Eli studies her, like he is seeing her courage and not just her chaos. He says, "Good." In the weeks that follow, Leah becomes a weirdly competent disaster. She still spills things, but now she spills them away from Eli's suit. She still forgets where she puts her phone, but she never forgets Eli's meetings. She learns the exact angle Eli likes his monitor, and she learns that he pretends not to notice when she brings Orbit extra food. Jessie starts leaving Leah sticky notes with dramatic captions like, "The Ice King softens," and "Romance update pending." Leah shoves the notes into her drawer, but she cannot stop smiling. One late night, the project deadline looms like a monster, and Eli and Leah are the last ones in the office. Leah sits at her desk with her head on her arms, fighting sleep. Eli steps out and says, "Go home." Leah lifts her head, hair messy, eyes heavy. She says, "If I go home, I will sleep, and if I sleep, I will dream, and if I dream, I will forget the budget formula." Eli says, "You will not forget." Leah says, "You underestimate my talent for forgetting." Eli sighs, then moves closer. He says, "Then rest for 10 minutes." Leah tries to sit up, but she wobbles, and without thinking she leans into him. Her cheek lands on his shoulder, warm through his shirt, and the world stops. Eli goes rigid. Leah murmurs, "Sorry, I am moving, I am moving." Eli says quickly, "Do not." Leah freezes, half asleep, and her breath puffs against his collarbone. Eli stays still, like motion might break something fragile. From the hallway, a faint camera click sounds again. Leah opens one eye and sees Jessie, phone held up, grin feral. Leah whispers, "Jessie, delete that." Jessie whispers back, "Absolutely not, this is history." The next morning, the office group chat is on fire. Leah walks in and sees phones held like mirrors, eyes wide, mouths covered, laughter bubbling. Someone whispers, "It is trending." Leah says, "What is trending?" Jessie spins his monitor toward her. The photo shows Leah asleep on Eli's shoulder, and Eli looking down at her like she is the only thing in the room. The caption reads, "The iceberg has a favorite human." Leah groans. She says, "I am going to die." Jessie says, "You are going to fall in love, different." Miranda appears at Leah's desk with a printed screenshot. Miranda says, "So this is how you move up, you play innocent and you cling." Leah stands, anger rising like heat. She says, "I fell asleep, it is not a scandal, it is exhaustion." Miranda says, "Sure, tell that to everyone." Leah says, "I will, because I am not ashamed of working hard." Miranda leans closer. She says, "People already think you are sleeping your way into his office." Leah's stomach drops. She says, "That is disgusting." Miranda's smile is satisfied. She says, "Welcome to real life." Leah wants to cry, but she refuses, because she will not give Miranda the satisfaction. She marches into Eli's office without knocking, which is a rule violation that could get her evaporated. Eli looks up, surprised. Leah says, "People are saying things." Eli says, "I know." Leah says, "They are saying I am sleeping with you." Eli's expression turns sharp, like someone just insulted his work. He says, "Who is saying it?" Leah hesitates, then says, "Miranda started it, but it spreads fast." Eli stands, and when the CEO stands, the air changes. He says, "Come with me." Leah follows him into the main conference space, where the company is gathering for the weekly all-hands meeting. Eli steps onto the small stage, takes the mic, and the room goes silent. Leah stands off to the side, heart pounding, cheeks burning. Eli says, "There is a rumor circulating about my assistant." A murmur ripples through the crowd. Eli's gaze sweeps the room like a scanner. He says, "Leah Carter has earned her position through work, competence, and persistence." Eli says, "If anyone spreads defamatory gossip about any employee, they will be terminated immediately." The room is so quiet that Leah can hear her own pulse. Eli says, "This is not a debate." He lowers the mic and steps back, and the meeting ends before anyone can breathe again. Leah stares at him, stunned. When they are alone again, Leah blurts, "You did that for me." Eli says, "I did that for the company." Leah says, "Stop saying that." Eli's brows lift. Leah says, "You did not have to protect me in front of everyone." Eli's jaw flexes, like he is fighting words. He says, "You are under my responsibility." Leah says, "I am not a file." Eli says, "No." His voice softens on the second word. He says, "You are not." Leah feels her chest tighten. She says quietly, "Then what am I?" Eli looks at her like the answer is dangerous. He says, "Go back to your desk." Leah goes, but her heart stays behind for a moment. The week after the rumor, Leah works even harder, determined to prove she belongs. She skips lunch, lives on granola bars, and keeps smiling so no one can see she is tired. On Thursday night, she stands up too fast, and the room tilts. Jessie catches her elbow. Jessie says, "Leah, you look like a haunted printer." Leah laughs weakly. She says, "I am fine." She is not fine. By midnight, her skin is hot, her head aches, and her vision blurs. She tries to stand, but her knees buckle. The last thing she hears is Jessie shouting, "Eli." Then everything goes dark, the kind of dark that does not require negotiation. Leah wakes up to fluorescent lights and the soft beep of a monitor. She blinks and sees a hospital room, white curtains, and a plastic cup of water on the tray. She turns her head and finds Eli sitting in the chair beside her bed, tie loosened, hair slightly messy, like he has been losing a war. Leah croaks, "Why are you here?" Eli exhales, and his voice is tight. He says, "Because you collapsed." Leah says, "Okay, but you could have sent Jessie." Eli says, Jessie panics. Leah says, "And you do not." Eli does not answer, but his hand is on the edge of the bed, fingers tense. A nurse walks in and says, "Your boyfriend has been hovering like a hawk." Leah's eyes widen. She says, "He is not my boyfriend." Eli says quickly, "Correct." The nurse smiles like she is not fooled. She says, "Sure, drink your water, and rest." When the nurse leaves, Leah stares at Eli. She says, "Boyfriend." Eli clears his throat. He says, "People assume things." Leah says, "You hate when people assume things." Eli says, "I hate when they are wrong." Leah's heart stutters. She says, "Are they wrong?" Eli looks at her, and for once he does not hide behind coldness. He says, "You have a fever." Leah laughs, then coughs. She says, "Nice deflection." Eli stands abruptly and reaches for the food tray. He says, "You need to eat." Leah says, "Is that an order?" Eli says, "Yes." He tries to open a cup of broth, fails, and then wrestles with it like it insulted him. Leah watches, amused. She says, "You are terrible at this." Eli says, "I am not." The lid pops, broth splashes, and Eli freezes, horrified. Leah laughs, the sound weak but real. She says, "You are very terrible at this." Eli's cheeks redden, just a little. He says, "I am learning." Leah says, "Why?" Eli says, "Because you do not take care of yourself." Leah says, "Because I have rent." Eli says, "Because you are stubborn." Leah says, "Because you are impossible." Eli says, "Because you matter." The words land between them like a gift and a risk. Leah goes still. She says softly, "I matter to you." Eli looks away, then back. He says, "Yes." Leah feels tears sting her eyes. Not sad tears, just overwhelmed ones. She says, "Eli, do you like me?" Eli's breath catches. He says, "Leah." Leah says, "That is not an answer." Eli opens his mouth, then the door bursts open and Jessie stumbles in, face pale. Jessie says, "We have a situation, the investor call got moved up, and the server is down, and marketing is on fire." Leah groans. She says, "Stop setting things on fire." Jessie looks guilty. He says, metaphorically. Eli stands, jaw tight, torn. Leah reaches for his sleeve with weak fingers. She says, "Go, I will be fine." Eli looks at her like he hates leaving. He says, "I will be back." Leah says, "Bring Orbit." Eli blinks. He says, "That is not possible." Leah says, "Consider it a requirement." Eli's mouth twitches again, that almost smile. He says, "Rest." After he leaves, Leah stares at the ceiling and thinks about the way he said, "Because you matter." She thinks about strawberry candy in the dark, and a CEO crouched on the sidewalk feeding a cat. She thinks about his hand on the bed, like he needed to anchor himself to her existence. 3 days later, Leah returns to the office with a bag of cough drops and a new stubborn determination. Eli meets her at the elevator, and for once he does not look like a glacier. He says, "You should be at home." Leah says, "I am allergic to staying still." Eli says, "You are still under medical advice." Leah says, "You sound like my mom." Eli says, "Your mom is correct." Leah walks into the office, and people clap softly, which makes her want to disappear. Jessie hugs her and whispers, "He almost killed someone when you fainted, it was kind of romantic." Leah whispers back, "He did not kill anyone." Jessie says, "Not for lack of desire." Miranda watches from her desk with a smile that does not reach her eyes. Leah decides she is done being polite. Over the next week, Leah keeps meticulous records of every task Miranda assigns, every file Miranda alters, every message Miranda sends. She does it quietly, like a hamster building a legal case. On the day of the holiday campaign launch, Miranda tries one more sabotage. She sends Leah a last-minute press release draft with the wrong product name and a typo in the investor quote. Leah does not panic. Leah forwards the email to Jesse, and then to Eli, with a note that reads, "This is the third time, please advise." Eli calls Miranda into his office within minutes. Leah cannot hear the conversation, but she can see Miranda's posture stiffen as she walks in, then deflate as she walks out. Miranda storms past Leah's desk, face red, and hisses, "You think you won?" Leah smiles sweetly. She says, "I did not think, I documented." 2 hours later, an HR representative walks Miranda to the elevator. The office is silent, then Jesse starts a slow clap, and the room erupts in relieved laughter. Jesse says, "Our girl just saved the company, and her own sanity." Leah says, "I also saved Orbit, because now no one will scare him." Eli steps out of his office and looks at Leah in front of everyone. He says, "Leah Carter, my office." The room gasps, because when Eli Thorne calls you in publicly, it can mean promotion or execution. Leah walks in, heart racing. Eli closes the door. He says, "Sit." Leah sits. Eli says, "You handled that well." Leah says, "Thank you." Eli says, "You should have told me sooner." Leah says, "I wanted proof, also I was scared." Eli's eyes narrow, not angry, focused. He says, "Scared of me?" Leah says, "Of losing my job, of being labeled the problem, of being the coffee girl forever." Eli's gaze softens. He says, "You are not the coffee girl." Leah says, "Then what am I?" Eli reaches into his desk drawer and pulls out a small item. It is a sticker, one of Leah's silly ones, a tiny sun with sunglasses. Eli sets it on the desk between them. He says, "You are the person who makes this place less cold." Leah feels her throat tighten. She says, "Eli." Eli says, "Your 3 months are almost done." Leah says, "I know." Eli says, "You can leave, if you want." Leah's heart drops, and she hates that it drops. She says, "Do you want me to leave?" Eli's voice is quiet. He says, "No." Leah laughs, shaky. She says, "Then say that." Eli meets her eyes. He says, "Stay." Leah says, "That is still not a complete sentence." Eli says, "Stay with me." The words change the air in the room. Leah forgets about rules and debts and coffee temperatures. She says, "Are you asking me on a date?" Eli says, "I am negotiating a contract." Leah says, "A romantic contract?" Eli says, "A lifetime contract." Leah covers her mouth with her hand, because she is smiling too wide, and she is afraid her face will break. She says, "You are doing the thing." Eli frowns. He says, "What thing?" Leah says, "Feelings." Eli says, "I am doing it poorly." Leah says, "You are doing it honestly, that is better." Eli looks like he wants to reach for her, but he stops himself, like he is still learning permission. Leah stands and walks around the desk. She says softly, "You can touch my hand, you know." Eli's hand lifts, hesitates, then takes hers with careful gentleness. His palm is warm, grounded, steady. Leah says, "See, not scary." Eli says, "You are still reckless." Leah says, "And you still like me?" Eli says, "Yes." The next week is a blur of holiday decorations and whispered office gossip. Someone hangs silver tinsel near the break room, and Eli hates it, but he does not remove it when Leah smiles at it. Jesse installs a tiny Santa hat on Orbit's head in a photo, then gets scratched and says it was worth it. Leah and Eli do not label anything yet, but they begin to share tiny moments that feel like belonging. Eli brings Leah a second cardigan when the office is cold. Leah adjusts the pen on his desk by 1 millimeter, and he does not correct her, he just watches her with a look that makes her stomach flutter. On December 24th, Stardust Tech throws a holiday party in the main lounge, with lights, music, and a ridiculous amount of cookies. Leah wears a green dress she borrowed from her roommate, and she feels almost grown up. Jesse whistles when he sees her. Jesse says, "If Eli does not faint, I will sue." Leah says, "Do not put fainting energy into the universe." The party begins, and Eli is nowhere to be seen. Leah circles the room, laughing with coworkers, but her eyes keep drifting to the door. An hour passes. Her chest tightens with disappointment she did not expect. She tells herself it is fine, he is busy, he is Eli, he is allergic to fun. Then the lights dim, and the music fades to a hush. A spotlight falls on the small stage near the tree. Eli steps up, and the room collectively stops breathing. He is in a dark suit, crisp and perfect, but his hands are slightly clenched, like he is nervous. In his arms he holds a bouquet, not of flowers, but of strawberry lollipops arranged like a ridiculous romantic weapon. The crowd erupts into squeals and laughter. Leah freezes, because her brain cannot process that she is the target. Eli takes the microphone. His voice is steady, but his eyes are only on Leah. He says, "Leah Carter." Leah feels her name land like a bell. Eli says, "The day you spilled coffee on my suit, I thought you were a disaster." The room laughs. Leah hides her face, mortified. Eli continues, and his tone warms. He says, "Then I learned you are also persistent, brave, and strangely capable of making everyone around you less afraid." Eli says, "I do not like the dark, I like cats, and I like strawberry candy, and I have spent my whole life pretending those things do not matter." Eli says, "You made them matter." Leah's eyes sting. Eli says, "Your 3 months are over, your debt is paid." Eli says, "But I am not done asking you to stay." Eli lifts the lollipop bouquet like he is offering her something both absurd and sincere. He says, "Will you be my girlfriend?" The room explodes. Jessie screams, "Yes," before Leah can speak. Leah laughs through tears and walks toward the stage, legs shaky, heart full. She says into the mic, "I will, but I have conditions." Eli's brows lift. He says, "State them." Leah says, "You cannot call me incompetent, you cannot measure phone with a ruler in public, and you have to admit you like fun at least once a week." The crowd laughs again. Eli's mouth curves, a real smile this time, small but undeniable. He says, "Agreed." Leah says, "Also, Orbit is our child now." Eli says, "Orbit is a cat." Leah says, "Our cat." Eli pauses, then nods once. He says, "Our cat." Leah steps close, takes the bouquet, and then stands on her toes to press a kiss to his cheek. Eli freezes for half a second, then his hand comes up to steady her waist, gentle and protective. The room cheers, and someone starts the music again. Jessie is crying dramatically into a napkin. Leah pulls back and whispers, "You did feelings on stage." Eli whispers, "I did them for you." Leah smiles. She says, "I guess I will keep you." Eli says, "That is the contract." Later, they step outside onto the terrace for a quiet moment, the city below glittering like spilled stars. Leah wraps her coat tighter and leans into Eli's side. Eli says, "Are you cold?" Leah says, "A little." Eli drapes his coat over her shoulders without hesitation. Leah says, "This is the same coat you said my wages could not buy the left button of." Eli says, "Then stop spilling coffee on it." Leah laughs. She says, "No promises." Eli looks down at her, eyes warm. He says, "I will keep a microfiber cloth ready." Leah says, "That is love, in your language." Eli says, "Do not translate for me." Leah says, "Too late." Below them, the holiday lights glow, and above them the winter air feels less sharp. In the warmth of his arm, Leah thinks about her first day, the stain, the debt, and the fear. She thinks about how a mistake turned into a strange, sweet bond. She thinks about a man who learned to laugh, and a woman who learned she deserves to be protected. Leah looks up and says, "Hey, Eli." Eli says, "Yes." Leah says, "Thank you for not firing me." Eli says, "Thank you for ruining my suit." Leah snorts. She says, "That is the most romantic thing you have ever said." Eli leans down and kisses her forehead, soft and certain. He says, "It is not the most romantic thing." Leah's heart flips. She says, "Then what is?" Eli says, "Stay with me, Leah." Leah smiles, eyes shining, and answers like it is easy. She says, "Always."
Thanks for watching. Follow for more romance stories.